I'm going to back it up a little. These guys have all used it and have it. I was going to talk about having it. We're just starting to try to get it. So who here does not have GPS but is looking at getting it or talking about getting it in the near future? Okay. So this is the problems we ran into and what we've seen. So in the last couple years, we've dabbled with different, let me get a towel.
No. Tablecloth will soak it up just fine.
Okay. So in the last couple years, we've dabbled with different experiments, trying GPS, doing it in small scales. We've seen different levels of acceptance. We've seen some acceptance that was not at all. We've seen even levels of sabotage at certain points for fear of having it in there. I guess you guys have too. So we've tried that in different areas. In the last year and a half, we've actually been budgeted. We came out with a research project. We ran through a research project, and the data that came back was pretty promising, and it pushed it forward into us trying a full-scale implementation. And that's where we got into trying to decide what we want, where we're going to go with this, what we're going to do with that. And to a degree, I have the advantage of Scott Lucas and Dean Lansing sitting here, who are also on our team, and I think you could attest that the last year's been trying at best to figure out where we want to be. So when you get a group together and you're going to decide what you want to do and what you want to do with this GPS and how much you want to collect, you go out and you get representatives from all our districts, and some of these representatives are very vocal and they know what they want. Some of these representatives just sit back and accept it. Some of these representatives will disagree, but a lot of times when they disagree, they won't say anything. So back to the squeaky wheel gets what we want. So we put this in, we put in what we call a request for information, and that's where we go out and we sit down with this group and we come up with what we think we want. And the people who are very talkative get everything they want on the list. We go out to the vendors, and when the vendors rolled in, guess what? The vendors could give us anything. I mean, if you want to see plows up and down, you want to see wing plows up and down, you want to see any type of movement, they can supply that for you as input. If you want to see your wetting, they can supply that, how much wetting you're putting out. If you want to see how much salt you're putting out, how much salt the operator said you're putting out versus how much you're actually putting out, they can do all that. But that's sensors, that's external sensors like you guys talked about on your drag chain. The problem we run into is whenever we have an external sensor, that's another maintenance item that we have to keep up and running. And in reality, in the last 2 years, we told them to start taking those sensors off our trucks because they were always failing. And this would directly put this back to putting those sensors on. So during this our request for information, all these vendors have come in and they've showed us this, and we can have this basic system or we could have the moon, and we have to try to find somewhere in between. So as we went through iterations of meetings and people voiced their opinions, we eventually started to come up with a system that was relatively complex. It had sensors to be able to tell if your plow was up or down, your wings are up or down, everything like that. Sensor in itself was a proximity sensor, but the overall thoughts were that there's another system outside that's going to fail, and as these sensors fail, how is it going to affect the productivity of the truck and the data of the truck that's coming back? The other concerns we had were hydraulic systems. We talked in our roundtable discussion that we don't always have a lot of confidence for the calibration of our hydraulic systems. We can have them calibrated, but as they change motors, as they change any type of flighting on our augers, consistency of the material, that all changes what actually is coming out the back versus what it thinks is coming out the back, and that will skew the data. And if we're truly coming back with this and reporting on it, then we have to have some type of understanding that that could vary from truck to truck, from storm to storm, from operator to operator. So those were other things that we threw into it. So as we were approaching what we call an RFP, which is a request for purchase, we had all this stuff listed, and then districts started to voice some of their concerns that it was too much. And that really all they want to know is where the truck is, where the truck is. They wanted a camera to see what the truck's doing, like Iowa. And they discussed lastly leaving the hydraulics hooked up, right? But any type of external sensor, including temperature sensors or anything else, they wanted off. So we had a full-blown meeting and we came to that, and that has led to a revision in the RFP that is going to roll out, and we're going to basically bring it back down to something a little simpler. We're in the last stages of getting ready to go out to the RFP. We've now designated where our trucks are, because the whole other area behind it, and I don't know how it is from state to state, but depending on where you are in Ohio, your reception for GPS and your reception for cellular varies. When we get to the southeastern, the hilly part of our state, you can't necessarily pick a good cellular reception up down there. There was discussion with us moving over to the new radio system that we could piggyback off the radio. So there was a whole nother option to look at, was whether we could piggyback off our two-way radio system and send the data. That all came into it also as play of how do we set that up and which ones do we go with and how do we standardize. So I guess what I'm saying is we brought a whole bunch of data in, and it really takes a lot of time, and you really have to kind of control that group to see what they really want, and get the people who don't want to speak up, who may not agree with what some of the people are that are speaking up, what really is wanted as a consensus. And what we found out was, as a consensus for the whole state, it's not as complicated as, or not as intense of a system with all the sensors that was originally planned. So again, the last thing we're doing now is we've designated trucks throughout our state, and that's basically to cover different hydraulics. You guys talked about standardizing to the Cirrus. Unfortunately, we have 4 different hydraulic systems that will all have to be integrated. And then the discussion is, how do you integrate that in to bring the data into one type of spreadsheet that can then be implemented into what we see on the back end. So that's a hurdle we have to cover. We also have to cover getting these trucks out into locations to make sure that we have the connectivity depending on the terrain of our states, north, south, east, and west, depending on where they're at, because that does vary in our region. So that's the last step we're at. We're pulling all that data in, and then hopefully we'll go out to RFP in the next couple weeks to month and see what the data comes back and see what the results and the pricing come back at. But I think the biggest thing I wanted to get across to you guys from the standpoint of we're just getting into it and what we've seen so far is you really got to get control of the group. You really have to see who's on it, and you have to make sure everybody on it, everybody that is on it is vocal, or you're just going to see it kind of run away to a degree with the people that really are throwing the ideas out, and that's what they want. Okay? So I wanted to give that little heads up of what we've been through. Thank you.